Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Maine Planning Basics webinar. My name is Abe Daly, and I'm a senior planner with the Municipal Planning Systems Program. These monthly webinars are intended for those new to the profession and those new to planning in Maine. I would like to remind people that we post the recordings and presentations of these webinars on our website. I'll post the link in the chat. You may also sign up for email updates about our trainings and webinars on our websites by entering your email in the Get MPAP Grants Training and News box on our website. Today we are joined by Abby Sherwin, SMPDC's Resilience Division Director, and Karina Grader, SMPDC's Sustainability Director, who will present the basics about sustainability and resilience planning. Now I'll turn it over to Abby and Karina.
Thanks, Abe. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I'll let Karina introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Karina. Thanks so much for having us today.
Yeah, and we have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you all, and we're going to go through some of the work that we've been involved with at Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, or SMPDC, just to highlight a few examples of planning projects and also cases of those planning projects translating into some implementation efforts as well. But I think the hope is to keep this fairly informal. So if anybody has questions or comments throughout our presentation, feel free to, I don't know how you normally do it, Abe, but raise your hand or come off mute. And feel free to just interrupt us during the presentation if you have questions or want to say something. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Karina.
Yeah, as Abby mentioned, today we're talking about the work we do in the Sustainability and Resilience Division at Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission. So we'll give a little bit of background, and then really we want to just sort of dive into the work that we do. First, we wanted to focus a little bit on climate action planning because that's really one of the fundamental areas of sustainability and resilience planning that Maine communities are thinking about and working on right now, and some resources we've developed through that work that we wanted to share with you all. And then we'll go through some examples of some of our current planning projects, which are sort of more topic specific or projects that have come out of climate action planning or that have informed climate action planning. And then we'll definitely have plenty of time at the end if folks have saved questions for the end or think of more for a little bit of Q&A and just general discussion about anything relating to sustainability and resilience planning.
All right, great. Thanks, Karina. So we thought we'd start with just giving you a little bit of background about our what is now called Sustainability and Resilience Division at Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission. So it looks like we have a smattering of maybe municipal planners as well as regional planners on the webinar. So SMPDC is a regional planning organization for folks who might not be familiar with us. And so we provide planning support to 39 member municipalities in York County. We also have a few communities in southern Oxford County as well as Cumberland County. So we have been providing climate-related planning support to communities for quite a while now. But in 2019, we sort of formally established a more concerted effort within our organization to provide direct support related to sustainability and climate resilience to a subset of our communities. We really provide the services to all of our member municipalities, but in 2019, 6 of our coastal communities came together with an identified need for some more direct technical assistance when it comes to sustainability and resilience initiatives. And they didn't want to go out and hire their own individual sustainability coordinators. And so they approached SMPDC with the concept of having this regional sustainability coordinator position that would provide some advanced level of support to those individual communities for sustainability. And so we were really fortunate to bring Karina on board to fill that sustainability position. And then I sort of just continued on with some of the work that I was doing, but was able to devote some more time to the coastal resilience and climate resilience planning work that was going on at SMPDC. So that happened in 2019. It was designed as a 2-year pilot program, but we've been very fortunate to continue that work beyond the 2 years. And so now we are no longer a pilot program, we are a full-blown division at SMPDC, which is very exciting. In 2021, we began supporting communities, probably like many of you all and many of your communities are involved with the state's Community Resilience Partnership. So this allowed us to expand the support and the services that we were providing to all of our member municipalities, and also allowed us to do some regional coordination outside of our sort of very southern Maine boundary, which was wonderful. 2022 was an important year for our program in that we exceeded the $5 million mark for bringing in external grant funding for local and regional climate-related projects in our region. And then we also were able to add a third team member to our division, sustainability and resilience planner. And then since then, we've been able to add a few more people to our team. Importantly, in 2023, we had an AmeriCorps fellow who was working with us, who then became a permanent staff person at SMPDC, Mar Fink, and I think they are on this webinar. So hi, Mar. And in 2024, again, we officially became a division at SMPDC, and we also had another AmeriCorps member, Kaya Williams, who transitioned to being our Department of Energy Community Energy Fellowship or fellow. So we have a pretty full team now. There are 5 of us total, which is wonderful. So it just has increased our ability to provide some expanded support and assistance to our communities throughout the region. So digging into a little bit more detail about what our division does, we support communities on an individual basis as well as a regional basis with climate action planning. We help to evaluate impacts of climate change to inform planning and implementation projects. We also provide a lot of support identifying funding opportunities for priority local and regional projects, and then actually write grants for communities as well to pursue those funding opportunities. We do some greenhouse gas emissions work, and specifically, I think Karina will talk more about this, but have developed a greenhouse gas inventory protocol specifically designed to assist smaller Maine communities with getting a handle on their emissions. We also provide support and have developed some technical resources for how communities can integrate climate change considerations and specifically coastal resilience into land use ordinances. Again, we support with like scoping out projects that meet priority needs of communities and the region. We do a lot of data analysis and research. And then one of the other things that we do is just, acknowledging that we are not experts on anything. But there are a lot of wonderful people in the state who are. And so we try to link communities with relevant experts and resources that meet their needs for topic-specific work. We also have at this point, it's an annual work plan that guides the work of our division. And this is based off of what our communities have told us their priority needs are, and also identified needs that have come out of some of our planning projects related to climate change. So I won't go into too much detail on this, but our guiding principles for our work plan and our entire division are to support collaboration across various levels of government. So we're looking at collaboration within individual communities, across communities, taking a full regional approach, and also collaborating with other nonprofit entities, other partners, as well as folks at the state. And then we strive to support communities with assessing their needs related to climate change, integrating climate change considerations into their municipal operations and decision-making structures, and then ultimately taking action and implementing projects. And we are funded by a variety of sources, but some of our funding comes from town support. A lot of our funding comes from grants. And then some comes from annual contracts that we receive through the state with state funding, federal funding. So it's really a sort of a hodgepodge of funding that we've pulled together to support the work that we do. And next slide, Karina. And then, of course, the Community Resilience Partnership has been wonderful. It's provided not only funding for some of the work that we do, but also funding opportunities for communities to advance priority projects related to climate change. And again, has also facilitated our participation in some broader regional coordinated efforts related to climate change. And we were a member of the Region 1 Coordinator Collaborative through the Community Resilience Partnership. We've also been able to serve as service providers for some of our communities to enroll them in the partnership. And then again, supporting communities with scoping out projects, writing applications for, and pursuing projects that are funded by the Community Action Grant Program. So I will turn it over to Karina to start talking about some of the specific projects that we've worked on.
Thanks. Yeah, so the first project we wanted to share with everyone was our Southern Maine Climate Action Planning cohort. You might be familiar with the idea of a climate action plan. It's a community-driven plan to identify priority actions for addressing climate change, both in reducing the emissions that cause climate change, as well as adapting to the impacts that your community will see in a climate changed future. So a few years ago, way back in 2021 or something like that, we had several communities reaching out to us saying that they wanted to create their own climate action plan, and could we help them? And so at the time, we wanted to be able to help everybody, and we also, a big part of our division's guiding principles is that working regionally promotes and advances individual town action. So we came up with this idea of working together with as many communities that were interested in doing climate action plans together. So we called it the Climate Action Planning or CAP cohort, and the communities that signed on were Kennebunkport, Kittery, and Biddeford. And so all four communities went through the process with us of creating a climate action plan. They each created their own individual plan, unique to the needs of their communities. But throughout the process, we worked together to share resources and discuss what were the priorities for the region. So it was a very long and complicated project, but by the spring of this year, all four towns had a climate action plan that was adopted by their town's governing body. We had a great group of partners who worked on it. We worked really closely with committees or task forces and the municipal staff within each community. We worked with ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, which is a nonprofit that provides climate action planning support to communities. And then we worked with Morse Communications and Zoe Miller Strategies for our public engagement, which was a very large part of this process because we wanted the plans to be as informed and by the public's priorities as possible, and that they were aware of and interested in helping implement the plans. And to support this process, we had kind of compiled together multiple different funding sources since it was such a big project. We received a community action grant for on behalf of all four towns. The towns also contributed themselves a little bit to the planning process. We were able to incorporate it into a JLUS or Joint Land Use Study implementation grant that the town of Kittery received. And we were also able to use some of our DACF coastal work plan funds to support the regional priority action component of the project. Um, we included a bunch of links on this PowerPoint, so hopefully Abe can share that afterwards. So if you want to learn more about the project, there's a link to the project webpage. But probably one of the most helpful things that came out of this for you all as planners is that with our JLUS funding, we were able to create a climate action planning toolkit. So this really is a web page on our website, but it has links to and copies to download a lot of resources that would be relevant for any Maine community interested in climate action planning or anyone who's supporting communities with climate action planning. We have template materials. We have an outline that we use for all 4 climate action plans. We have a template community survey, and we also have a overly comprehensive strategy matrix of all the strategies that the communities considered for their climate action plans with a lot of details about them, their benefits, their implementation considerations, that sort of stuff. And then also the resources we use to develop the plan. So as Abby mentioned, one of those resources is a greenhouse gas emissions inventory protocol that we developed for Southern Maine communities and that we've used to conduct greenhouse gas inventories for several communities in our region. Another thing that we have in there is a vulnerability assessment framework. So that sort of outlines all the different climate hazards that could be considered for a climate change vulnerability assessment that goes into a climate action plan. And, the various data sources of those and the various scenarios that it should be looked at. We also have a resource that came out of one of the committees we worked with, a climate action planning best practices, which just has some really helpful sort of insights to think about at the beginning of the process that would be helpful when sort of determining your own climate action planning process. And then finally, we also have a community engagement plan that sort of outlines all of the different reasons and ways and tools for engaging your community throughout the climate action planning process. And that's just a small selection of everything that's on there. There's a lot more, including example climate action plans, links to outside resources. So if you're interested in climate action planning, I definitely recommend taking a look. To give you a quick example of what some of these look like, this is that climate change vulnerability assessment framework that I was mentioning, where you have the hazards, their impacts, what you're hoping to get out of your assessment, and also the data sources you can use. So really, really comprehensive, and you can use this and sort of look through and say, what would be relevant to my community? And hopefully this would help point you in the right direction for what to include. And then similarly, this is that comprehensive strategy matrix we were talking about of strategies that could go into a climate action plan, details about them, equity considerations, co-benefits, all sorts of things to consider. And it's broken down by sort of climate action focus area. This example is for buildings and energy. Okay, so that's that for the climate action planning overview. I know it's really quick, but Abby, you had a group question you wanted to share?
Well, just so that we're not talking at you for so long, and I
Yeah.
see that Erica posted the link to the climate action planning toolkit that Karina was just talking about in the chat. So thank you, Erica, for doing that. Yeah, and as Karina mentioned, I think one of the most valuable aspects of all those resources is that they just provide some guidance and a framework for others to consider utilizing, but they're all customizable, which is really nice. So we're hoping that those will be used by others across the state and make things a little bit easier and more streamlined for future climate action planning efforts. So we were just curious if any of you have received requests from municipalities, or if you're from a municipality, if you yourself have wanted to integrate climate change considerations and information into any of your planning and land use regulatory efforts. So comprehensive plans, land use ordinances. So if that's something that's work that you're already doing or are in the process of starting out on, we'd be really interested to hear about your experiences, and then also what resources you use to support some of that work. And if nobody wants to come off mute or pop anything in the chat, that's okay. We can just move on to the next slide too, but I'll wait a minute before we move on to the next slide in case anybody does want to share anything.
I just want to jump in and say I haven't looked at this toolkit yet, and it's really, really extremely useful and will be helpful to any of the planners. So thank you guys for putting this together. It's really, really great.
Thanks, Erica. All right, and there's a comment in the chat that KVCOG, or Kennebec Valley Council of Governments, is integrating climate change into a municipal comp plan currently, and that they will also be doing that 1 or 2 more times in the near future. So that's excellent. Grania, are there any specific resources that you found particularly helpful in the work that you're doing now with that?
I just because of my background, I tend to reference FEMA a lot. It's kind of been my go-to as far as, hazard mitigation and climate change really go hand in hand. So working that into my town's comp plan. And then a lot of the federal agencies tend to have a lot more forecasting that comes in handy for the longer term planning efforts.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, in our work, we've used a variety of different data sources, and some of it comes from federal agencies, some of it has come out of state agencies, and a lot of great information has been developed that's sort of state specific now from the statewide climate action planning work and the Maine Climate Council. And so we've really benefited from that information that's being produced at the state level for some of the work that we do. Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share or ask right now? Okay. Karina and I will just keep talking then. Okay. Again, just highlighting a few projects that we have completed somewhat recently that relate to climate resilience or sustainability planning. A few years ago now, we completed what we called an economic resilience and assessment plan for coastal York County. And this planning initiative arose out of some other sea level rise and coastal flooding work that we had done with our communities, or some of our communities. And what we heard from communities is that it's really important to not understand sort of the infrastructure that's going to be impacted by sea level rise and coastal flooding, and the areas that are going to be inundated, but also what are the economic considerations associated with climate change impacts, and specifically coastal flooding. And then also, if we're looking at future projections of coastal flooding, what might some storms of the future look like? So if we were to combine storm surge that we experience now with impactful events and future sea level rise, what might the inundation impacts be in that case? And so we utilized for this project funding through the Economic Development Administration's disaster supplemental funding. So anytime there's a federally declared disaster, I think it's anytime, the Economic Development Administration, or EDA, receives some supplemental funding for projects in areas that are part of the disaster declaration. And so we took advantage of that funding a few years ago to do this planning project And we worked with some technical consultants and then 6 of our coastal communities. And we did some regional flood modeling, again, to take a look at the impacts or inundation extent of sea level rise combined with storm surge, which was new flood modeling for our region. We also did a vulnerability assessment. So we looked at, flood impacts to people, property, and the natural environment as part of this project. And then a large piece was also looking at the economic impact of projected future flooding. And so it was a pretty in-depth assessment into businesses, employment, all sorts of other economic factors that are tied to our coastal communities and specifically coastal tourism, because that is such an important driver of our local and regional economy down here in southern Maine, as it is, I think, across the entire coastline. So we took a detailed look at some of the economic impacts of coastal flooding for our individual communities and then the region as a whole. And we came up with some recommendations and strategies about how to enhance not only economic resilience related to coastal flooding, but also physical and community resilience to flooding. So that study was fairly comprehensive. And again, it built off of some other previous planning projects that we had done. One of the other things that we heard from our communities related to sea level rise planning is that decision-making at the local level sometimes requires some economic information to drive decisions. And so we also took a look at the assessed value of properties that are projected to be within the inundation zone, and then translated the value of impacted assessed properties into impacts to municipal tax revenue and municipal operating budgets, so that some of our communities could get a better sense of what the economic impacts to them as a community would be, sort of if no action is taken to better prepare for sea level rise and adapt to and mitigate the flooding. So we have a slew of resources that came out of this project. We've got some online web mapping tools that came out of the project. We've got individual reports that talk about our flood modeling work, the economic analysis, and then we have one sort of comprehensive final report that summarizes all of the information and talks about some of the resilience recommendations and strategies that we developed through the project. So next slide, Karina. So building off of that economic development project, and then also some of the other sea level rise planning projects that we've done with either small groups of communities or somewhat on a sub-regional basis. We recently undertook a larger regional effort to look at some coastal resilience needs and opportunities in the region. And so we pursued funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, National Coastal Resilience Fund, to do a climate resilience planning project that we called Climate Ready Coast Southern Maine. And that involved 10 Southern Maine's 10 southernmost communities in Maine. So Scarborough down to Kittery. We worked with folks from the Wells Reserve and Maine Sea Grant, and also had some support from NOAA staff through this project, and it was fairly comprehensive. We did a regional vulnerability assessment looking at the impacts of coastal flooding and sea level rise. We had a working group of people from each of the 10 communities, as well as partner organizations, land trusts, federal agencies, and some state agencies as well. Using the results of the vulnerability assessment, we went through a fairly complicated process of identifying priority vulnerable sites across the region, where adaptation efforts were important, needed, and also would be beneficial to not only the individual community where the project was happening, but the region as a whole. And so we came up with, a matrix or an extensive spreadsheet of different coastal adaptation strategies that would be applicable specifically for the southern Maine coastline, but a lot of those strategies are applicable across the state coastline. So there are some resources from this project that would be applicable, hopefully, to other areas of the state. And then one of the things we were focusing on is how nature-based strategies can be utilized to support coastal resilience and help communities adapt. But we also recognized that there aren't a lot of these nature-based strategies that have been implemented in southern Maine. And so a lot of people don't know exactly what they might look like if they were to be implemented on the ground. And so we worked with a consulting firm to come up with some visual renderings. They're not technical designs, they're not engineered designs, they're just sort of visual representations of what some of the nature-based adaptation strategies might look like on the landscape if they were to be implemented in certain places. And so we have 15 of those renderings that people can take a look up. And then we also developed a fairly comprehensive list of funding opportunities that communities in the region could take advantage of to support implementation of some of these adaptation strategies, or at least the next steps from planning to design to construction and permitting requirements and all of that. So we have a spreadsheet of all sorts of funding opportunities that could be tapped into to support some of this work. And again, all of this information is on SMPDC's website. So lots of resources that hopefully have applicability to other areas of the state. So next slide, Karina. So beyond the planning projects that we've done, we also wanted to highlight some of the more technical work that we've done that has attempted to provide some guidance about how to integrate sustainability and resilience considerations into land use ordinances and regulatory considerations. And so one of the things we wanted to highlight today was a resource that we developed in partnership with FB Environmental Associates, which is a consulting firm, and also a few towns from across the coastline. So Kittery, Wells, South Portland, Tremont, and Vinyl Haven, to develop some model ordinance language and also guidance for integrating coastal resilience considerations into land use and zoning in Maine. And so we've got this resource that included a screenshot of just the cover, but it includes a lot of information that was developed again in partnership with the communities, but also with some state agencies as well, for how to integrate enhanced climate resilience measures into a range of different ordinances. So we've got sections about the floodplain ordinance, shoreland zoning, base zoning, and then a few other sort of normal or zoning sections that most communities have. And then there's also guidance in there about a coastal resilience overlay zone and how communities might want to approach that. And there's some good information in there about how communities in Maine, as well as elsewhere, have integrated climate considerations and coastal resilience measures into their land use regulations. So that's just one example that is less on the planning project side of things and more on the regulatory side of things. So I will turn it back over to Karina.
Thanks, Abby. So the next couple of projects we wanted to highlight, we wanted to share them because these are two projects that came out of the climate action planning process. So one of the best things, again, about that project was that we were able to talk amongst all the communities about what their priorities were for the region, or what were projects that were very important to their community, but they just felt like at the local government level, it wasn't the right place to try and implement them. So the first of these two projects that have come out was about grid resilience planning. So in the community engagement for all those plans, we heard again and again that power outages were an increasing concern for the communities with the number of extreme storms we've had over the past few years, our aging electrical infrastructure, and that with increasing electrification of electric vehicles and transitioning homes to electric heating, people were concerned about how their local electric grid was going to be able to handle that. And so while there was a lot of work going on the state level about that, and is currently going on at the state level, it didn't feel like that was getting translated down to people's communities. And so folks really wanted some sort of a regional energy resilience planning effort to come out of the climate action planning process. So we at SMPDC took that feedback and started scoping out a project and trying to identify funding that could support a regional energy resilience plan. And one of the things that we were able to do was find funding through the EDA Disaster Supplemental Grant Program. That's the same program that funded the Economic Resilience Assessment we did a few years ago. And were awarded funding to do a regional energy resilience planning process. So um, this is really going to be this is just getting started. We just got the funding a month or so ago. So it's going to be an 18-month planning process. And our goal really is to, first and foremost, bring together stakeholders who participate in electricity use in Southern Maine. So everything from the utilities themselves to the state energy office, the emergency management staff in local communities, community service centers like the hospitals, as well as the businesses that rely on electricity and reliable electricity to continue operations. Our goal is to bring together all of those folks to do an assessment of the state of the grid in Southern Maine, and the current challenges and opportunities it has, and then identify some strategies to promote grid resilience at the local or regional level that will complement the actions that are happening at the state. So those could be anything from, partnering on grant applications to do infrastructure upgrades or, pilot battery storage systems, or they could be things like modifying ordinance language to provide for better vegetation management so that less trees are falling down on power lines. So we're really excited about this project, and we're just getting started. We haven't even put together a stakeholder group. We currently have an RFP out for a consultant to provide a lot of the technical and facilitation support on the project. So this is one that we're looking forward to sharing more information about in the future, but we just really wanted to highlight how, these other planning processes have led to more regional projects that really focus on the priorities of our communities when it comes to climate change. And then the last project I wanted to highlight is our new Energy Navigator pilot program. This one's a little bit different because it is not a planning project, but it is an implementation project that has come out of, again, that climate action planning process. So the communities we were working with for the climate action plans, a big priority for them was supporting their community members in adopting heat pumps, weatherizing their homes, and generally supporting home electrification. But we heard from them that they felt like their small local government and local community didn't really have the capacity or bandwidth to stand up their own program to provide additional outreach and assistance to community members on energy upgrades. And so this concept of an energy navigator program has sort of been floating around at the state level, and other communities have tested it out too, like York with their energy coaches program. But we figured it was probably a great idea to test out a regional or multiple community energy navigator program. And so we identified some funding to go after. The Department of Energy had an energy efficiency conservation block grant program that was a competitive program specifically for smaller communities and for teams of smaller communities to apply to. And we were awarded a grant for that through that program for 3 years to provide technical assistance and then financial incentives for home energy upgrades. And this is an energy navigator program where we'll have fellows serving as energy navigators. So they'll be providing one-on-one assistance to homeowners who navigate through the energy upgrade process from initial just interest in what they might do, identifying the solutions that fit for their home in terms of what heat pumps to install or what insulation they need, helping them get connected to contractors, figuring out what rebates they're eligible for, all the way to having the installation completed and then figuring out if they are eligible for and how to apply for any tax credits. So we have a lot of partners on this program. The towns themselves are Kittery, Ogunquit, Wells, Kennebunk, and Kennebunkport. So some of them are towns that did the climate action planning process with us. Some of them are towns that we've worked with from that original 6-town group that we started with 6 years ago. And then also in that group is York County Community Action Corps, which is corporation, which is the community service organization that provides a lot of the home assistance programs for low income community members in York County. So a big focus of this project is low and moderate income homeowners. Our goal is really to try and bridge the gap between what current incentive programs exist and what it truly costs to do these upgrades, to make it as easy as possible for our low and moderate income community members, in recognition that there are many barriers that folks face when trying to do these upgrades, and there's additional support that's needed. So again, this is a pretty different project from the other planning projects, but it really is getting to that last guiding principle we have of supporting the implementation of climate actions, and is an area we're expanding our work in providing regional support to implementation. That really is, the ultimate completion and what we hope for our planning projects to get to. So that's that project. And then the last thing we wanted to share is that, also thinking of implementation, we are hosting a workshop November 13th, which is a Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. This is we're calling it the Southern Maine Climate Action Workshop. It's the first of something like this we've hosted in person. It's going to be at the University of New England at their Biddeford campus. And this really also came out of the climate action planning process, where we worked together and met a lot about the planning, and there was a desire to continue meeting and sharing challenges and working together to implement the climate action plans. So it's open to board and committee members, municipal staff, planners, community organization members, and really anyone from a Southern Maine community that's interested in helping climate actions get implemented in their community. And so if this is something of interest to any of you, please do consider joining us. And there's a registration link on the slide, but also if you look at like any of our social media pages or LinkedIn, things like that, if you haven't yet gotten an email blast from us, please look at those. And with that, I think that is the end of our information and time for questions and discussion. So maybe I will stop sharing my screen. And then, yeah, we can just open it up to anything anyone wants to talk about. If there's anything we went through too quickly that you want us to go back to or provide more information for, happy to do that.
Yeah. Also, anything that you were hoping we might talk about that we didn't get to, if people have questions about that, please feel free to pop them in the chat or come off mute. And I see there is a comment in the chat saying that I've found some universities provide really innovative green code ideas, which could help municipalities develop in a more sustainable way. And they were looking for one as an example, but couldn't find one, which is unfortunate. So I don't know if Cameron, if you want to talk more about that comment. The Model Coastal Resilience Ordinance document that I mentioned and showed one of the slides about, that does have some green information in it, but related to green codes. So hopefully there's some information in that document that maybe is helpful. But yeah, if other people have thoughts about where to find good examples of that, that'd be helpful to hear.
I'll mention, Abby, when you're presenting about you had those renderings you were showing, it reminded me of a guidance document the state planning office put out almost 50 years ago, which has some really great illustrations in it. So I'll post the link to that in the chat. Even though it's from 1976, it's still interesting visuals.
Right. Thanks, Abe. Yeah, I think we found that visuals are very helpful for illustrating what some of these planning concepts or even like the zoning concepts could look like.
Jim.
Sure. I'll be a little provocative, maybe. I'm concerned. I mean, a lot of what you're doing is great stuff, and I've been on the gravy train too. The grant environment's been great, but we're coming into an election where I think things are not going to be so great afterwards. With very high probability, we're going to have a conservative Senate, possibly a Republican president. I'm curious how we sustain these efforts. A lot of what we're doing seems to me to be very dependent on these grants. Have you come up with processes where towns are going to own this and raise taxes to pay for additional sustainability work? Or do you think that we're all just a little dependent at this point on all the grants?
That's a very good question. I think that to some extent, we are very dependent on the grants. I think the work that we have done in Southern Maine, and I'm sure most, if not all, people on this call have done, has maybe been funded by, I would say, non-traditional sources, but sources of funding that don't necessarily have climate as a priority, right? And who knows what's going to happen with the election? There could be a complete overhaul of a lot of federal agencies. Hopefully not. But the hope is that there will be funding for some work moving forward. And maybe there's an opportunity for pursuing climate-related projects through funding sources that don't necessarily have climate as a priority. One of the things we've done with a lot of our planning-related efforts, actually, I think all of them, is to come up with strategies and recommendations for how to finance this work at both the local and to some extent the regional level. They include all sorts of things like, establishing some sort of municipal reserve fund is one of them, utilizing tax increment financing districts for some resilience measures is another one. So different approaches for funding some of this work locally. And I know there are some communities that are pursuing sort of creative funding opportunities that don't necessarily tie into increasing taxes. Ogunquit, Maine, for example, on the ballot next week is a question about establishing a municipal resilience reserve fund to support some of this work, and it would just be taking money out of the general fund, I believe, and just dedicating it for some climate related work to pay for various projects or needs that come up that don't necessarily have a specific alternative funding source, or if there's some work that needs to be done in order to pursue additional funding, that pot of money could pay for that initial work. So yeah, it's a good question. Karina, do you have anything to add on that?
I think the only thing to add on that is that, like, the start of our program and the journey we've been on since wouldn't really be possible without the money that the pilot towns put in to fund sort of that pursuing of grants, the identifying of projects, the just general assistance, getting communities on board and, presenting to their select boards. So yeah, the grants have definitely been a part of why we've been able to expand and do better, but I think they have to go together. That the towns, the source of the success was the town support, and then that allowed us to get the grants. So I think my point is just that the town support is still important. So whether or not the grants go away, we'll be able to find something to do as long as we continue to work with them closely. In addition to like questions for Abby and I, we'd also be very interested to hear if other folks wanted to share their experience with sustainability and resilience planning, like, a successful project that you've thought of during this presentation, or any challenges you're having. What are the community needs you're seeing, and that sort of stuff. So if anyone's interested in sharing, we'd love to hear that too.
So, Karina and Abby, I'll just pop in and let you know that I continue to think you're the rock stars that I've been thinking you are for years. And this is fantastic work. And much of what you're doing is transferable to other parts of the state that will help a lot of people not have to reinvent the wheel. So, just awesome work. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
I think the feeling's mutual.
I think Rachel commented she has a question. Sorry if I got your name wrong too.
No, sorry, I'm just typing it.
Oh.
That was sorry, I barely talk well, but that was my wait a second, I'm typing my question.
I see. Sorry about that.
Question. In the meantime, over for the Hancock County Planning Commission, and we'll be working with the town island of Frenchboro to update their land use ordinance, which hasn't been touched since 1991. And they want to incorporate some coastal resilience climate language in there, and I think your model ordinance will be huge for helping with that. But I'm curious where you think you would start for an ordinance that hasn't been updated since the 90s, um, regarding climate and coastal resilience.
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe not an easy answer, but I think that model coastal resilience ordinance guidance document, mouthful, does have, it's organized in a way that identifies some low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And then one of the things that was done for that project, in addition to creating the guidance document, was to do a review or audit of sorts of existing municipal ordinances, land use ordinances, to identify, what was on the books in some communities. And so is, already providing some sort of resilience measure or benefit to those communities. And what could be improved. So that sort of audit or assessment document is also on our website, on the project webpage, and I can make sure to put the appropriate links in the PowerPoint if Abe is going to either send that out to everybody or post it. So that might be a good place to look as well, because it breaks down specific ordinances or sections of ordinances where there are good opportunities to integrate, again, some low-hanging fruit for coastal resilience measures. So that might be some information that could be helpful as you start.
Thank you.
And I will say, I think, the existing ordinances that tie into coastal resilience measures already are probably a great place to start, like shoreland zoning and the floodplain management ordinance. So if you're looking at specific ordinances to focus on, I would say those are two good opportunities.
And then I see Rachel put her question in the chat. It's, how do you keep momentum going with communities and leaders when energy is wavering or in the face of discouragement? Challenging one. I don't know, Abby, if anything immediately comes to mind for you.
Good question, Rachel. I think it's not, I don't know. I feel like we're approaching a possible inflection point here next week with how discouraged people might feel about some of this work. But I think that it hasn't been too difficult to keep momentum going when we are experiencing and observing the impacts on a fairly regular basis now. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of impactful storms over a short period of time in the past 2 years. And so it's, I think there is a sense that the need to do something is pretty strong in a lot of the communities that we work with. So I feel like we're responding to what the communities are asking of us at this point, and what they are identifying as priorities and needs for immediate or near-term action. So that's definitely part of it. And then I think the funding landscape too. There's just so much funding opportunity right now available for a lot of this work. And I think there's a general sense among a lot of the communities that we work with that it's, now is the perfect time to take advantage of the funding, because there is that need and there is that opportunity. And so it's a good time to be pursuing this work.
Those are great points. And another thing I'll add to it is, during the climate action planning process with some of the communities, when they were sort of faced with their list of strategies, there was this moment where they went through all the possible strategies and they said, these are all important. We want to do all these things, but oh my gosh, how are we going to do all these things? It just seems so hard. And so one of the things that I feel like was helpful to get past that and build momentum up again and keep people committed to addressing the whole picture was talking about how the communities are not doing this work alone, which was very easy to point out because we were in a collaborative process, but that each action did not mean that the communities had to do each action on their own, that some of these were already in process, that they were already doing, like updating their land use ordinance, or building new public facilities where it'd be easy to incorporate energy efficiency upgrades. Some of them were things that are happening at the state level and they just have to make sure they'll participate in. And some of them are things that we'll be working with them on. And, since we are the regional planning organization and not, a one-time project consultant, we will be here for the long term to continue to support them in their priority actions. And that really seems to help a lot. And that sort of camaraderie of we're not facing this alone and we're committed to this, our neighbors are committed to this, so it's more likely to happen, I think was really impactful.
At this point, unless there are any other questions or unless anyone else has anything they'd like to discuss, it may be a good time to wrap up this meeting. So I'd like to thank Karina and Abby for this great presentation today. This concludes our session for November. Our next Maine Planning Basics webinar will be on Friday, December 6th, when we will have a presentation from Cape Elizabeth Town Planner Maureen O'Mara about zoning for rural communities. Thank you for joining us today and have a good day.
Thanks, Abe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.